I'm so tired and I sprained my neck last night, but we are gonna film and we'll get it out of the way and then I'm gonna nap. Hey guys, welcome back to my bedroom. Today we're gonna be talking about relapse and the important role that that plays in recovery. Relapse itself has negative associations with that word, and in a lot of the conversations that I've had with people, it's seen as a failure. Often feelings of shame and guilt will accompany the person who has relapsed. Recovery can be a very personal and complicated and lengthy process, so relapse can feel like a personal failure or like there is something that is a character flaw in that person. It's also exceedingly common. A huge portion of people who achieve long-term recovery will have experienced relapse in their early recovery journey, and sometimes even in their late recovery journey. My experience with alcohol recovery likely would have been incredibly different had I not experienced the relapse that I went through in the end of 2017. So my drinking heavily started and kind of went on in 2015, and I will get more into my recovery story in a different video, but basically the background to this is that in 2015 I was aware that I had a problem. I was going to counseling, I had a doctor, I had a psychiatrist, I was doing group therapy, and I admitted to a few family members at the time as well that I had a drinking problem. So I was aware that I had a problem. But what happened was in September of 2015, I stopped drinking. I switched to marijuana and did the marijuana maintenance, and that was the new addiction that I had, and I just quit drinking cold turkey. So for 2 years I stayed sober and was pretty convinced at that point that I didn't have a drinking problem because I wasn't drinking. I was aware that I had a self-control problem, but even everyone around me knew that I didn't drink alcohol. And to be completely honest with you, like, I had no issues not drinking. I genuinely don't like the taste of alcohol and I don't like the burn of alcohol. I'm just a sucker for the buzz and the blackouts. But there was a 2-year period where, if I was offered it, I would turn it down. During those 2 years, I had a lot of growth. I was the healthiest I had ever been. I was doing CrossFit and eating really well. I was working in my dream job. There were a lot of things that were going really well for me. And it was really clear that not drinking alcohol correlated very strongly to growth and productivity in my life. And then the second half of 2017 happened. I do plan on doing a video about my recovery story and like the journey of the whole process. So I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail here, but basically I had 2 really big breakups within the span of 2 months. And then I was triggered by a lot of childhood stuff because I was working as a nanny. And I was working as a nanny, meaning I wasn't talking to parents. I wasn't talking to adults. I had no interaction with humans except for like toddlers. So basically by September of that year, I was really triggered and I was already struggling, and it happened to be that month that I got into a huge blowout fight with my mother, which resulted in us not talking for almost a whole year. So a lot of the stuff that I went through in the next following months, we weren't talking. Which was also incredibly hard for me. I felt like I was losing a lot and I didn't really have any way of grasping or holding on to anything. And even throughout like October, November, I was being very open and upfront with my bosses, saying that I was struggling and that I wasn't sure how to handle things. But I just kept pushing through and ignoring the distress that was building up. So for their Christmas party in December, one of them asked if I wanted to pick up anything from LCBO. And I didn't really think about it too much, about the repercussions or the consequences. I just thought about the fact that I was going to be at a Christmas party at my employer's, so I couldn't go overboard. There were kids there that I obviously was not going to go crazy around. And that all felt very safe and controlled, and I decided, why not have a drink? It's been a long time, it's been 2 years, and I could handle a drink. This is not a big deal. And actually that party was totally fine. It was not a big deal. I didn't get drunk. I didn't go overboard. I left when I needed to. That was December 15th, 2017, and the next weekend I was blacking out. So my relapse lasted 8.5 months. I was dry for 2 months in May and June, but I consider the experience of 2018 to be my relapse period. And I needed to go through that to understand how severe my drinking problem was. I needed to go through that to experience that and to come back stronger and more able to educate and inform people. I had to experience relapse in order to actually get to recovery, because for me, it didn't happen the first time that I quit drinking. It was 2 years between quitting drinking and relapse. It was actually just over 2 years. And within that time, I'd convinced myself, and a lot of people around me had convinced themselves, that there wasn't actually a problem. This isn't going to be everybody's experience, and I'm certainly not advocating to relapse for relapse's sake, but what I am saying is that it can be a really important learning tool. I view relapse as a door to self-discovery. It can show us where our weaknesses and our triggers are, but it can also show us our strengths and just how far we have come. My drinking behaviors during relapse were far more dangerous than my original drinking behaviors, and I've come to learn that that is not uncommon, and that is actually a very consistent experience for people who have relapsed. During that period, I lost all hope, all reason, and all sense of self. I had nothing left but drinking, and I'm really lucky I got the help that I did. Without that experience, I would not have been able to effectively look back and reflect on the actual experience of my substance use and the actual concerns that were there even long before the consistent use started to happen. Without that experience, I probably would still be miles away from dealing with certain personal triggers and past traumas that I have to deal with now that I'm in active recovery. I am leaps and bounds ahead of where my mentality was before my relapse happened. And as much as I was like the healthiest that I had been before relapse, it's still mentally, I'm so much farther ahead now. And I think that that has a lot more to do with the work that I've been putting in rather than just time. It's also just because of how much I've learned about myself in the last 2 years. There is another way to look at relapse though, and it tends to be a source of shame and guilt and internal pain. It's when relapse is looked at as a failure or a moral flaw or a personal mistake in recovery. And this is how I was taught to view relapse through the lens of AA. AA has this CHIP program, which is basically these aluminum coins that are given out as milestone markers for your sobriety journey. They're supposed to be incentives, rewards for you to be proud of when you've accomplished a certain milestone of recovery time. And they're definitely looked at as something to look forward to in meetings. It's a big thing that they do at the beginning of every meeting is this CHIP ceremony. Most meetings will give them out at every month, at 1 year, 5 years, and so on. Some meetings will do it at 1 month, 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, etc. I have quite the hefty stack of them. Most 1 year celebrations come with like a medallion, so it's definitely a little bit thicker and like higher quality than these ones. I left the program 2 years before my 1 year celebration, but that's fine. I got to celebrate in concert with Pink instead and got myself a sobriety ring, so we're good. But what I want to talk about is this chip. I have 3 of them, and I want to talk about what these are. So this is the 24-hour chip, or the desire to stop drinking chip. I don't know what the focus is like there, but they're all pretty similar. I do have this one as well that someone gave me that supposedly touched the graves of Bill W. and Dr. Bob, supposedly. I got it in Stratford, and those graves are in Ohio, so who knows what happened. So this 24-hour desire to stop drinking chip symbolizes a new member coming into the program and making a dedication to stop drinking. It's kind of seen as like taking the first step towards recovery. You can go to a lot of meetings and not take one of these, and when you do take one of these, it's kind of symbolizing to the group that like, okay, I'm starting my recovery. A dedication to not drink for 24 hours, all wrapped up in this shiny piece of cheap metal. And there are some glaring issues with this chip because it's also meant for people who have relapsed. The way that AA looks at relapse, at least in my experience, is that relapse erases your sobriety time and that you start over from scratch. You start back at day one and start back at step one. You have to re-admit that you have no control and that your life is unmanageable and that you haven't done all of this work for whatever amount of sobriety time you had previous to your relapse. And one of the biggest things that I have a problem with and that bothered me about this is that if you have relapsed and you are a part of the group and you are expected at the meeting to stand up in front of this room of 30 people who know your story, know your sobriety, walk up to the front and accept a 24-hour dedication chip. That feels so uncomfortable and condescending and unnecessary and shameful. It literally is putting somebody on display for a relapse that is so common in recovery and shaming them for that choice. There's another thing that AA does really well, and that is instills the fear of overblown consequences. One of the main concepts that AA reinforces is that those of us who suffer from substance use disorder have no self-control, even in recovery. They discuss that it's not a choice to have 1 drink to 100 drinks, that it's inevitable, that if you have a sip of alcohol, you will be drinking the bottle. They remove nuance and individuality, and they don't even consider years of sobriety and self-control in that fear that they instill. It's something that's deeply ingrained in their members, and it's something that even after a year out of the program, that is still ingrained in me and that I'm trying to work forward and work through. They work to convince you deep down in your core that if you are in those basements, that you cannot have 1 drink. I'm also not advocating that you go run out and drink and try this or try to have 1 drink. I know personally right now in my recovery that I would not be able to have 1 drink. That it is something that I would go to getting blacked out afterwards because of the process that I'm going through and because of the state of recovery that I'm in. But that doesn't mean that 20 years from now, when I have a lot more recovery under my belt, that this isn't something that I'm going to be able to do. I'm going to get more into how AA indoctrinates its beliefs into its members in a different video, but I will mention here that AA coined the term terminally unique. And although it does have different meanings based on the different connotations that it's used in, one of the ways that it's used is when members come across newbies who think that they can drink responsibly or drink safely, or if they start talking about ideas that this program might not be the one for them. These new members are labeled as terminally unique and egocentric and told that the reason that they think these things is because they think that they're this unique and that they need to give into the program in order to recover. In my experience and opinion, AA views relapse as a failure and uses shame and guilt manipulation to encourage its members to not relapse. I can't tell you how many times I was uncomfortably watching somebody who was solid in their sobriety slink their way up to the front of the meeting to grab a chip after 1 weekend of drinking. Am I happy that I relapsed in 2017 and had that experience? No, I do believe that it is what got me to where I am today and has created the foundation for this series. It was a huge learning tool, and it's the reason why I'm so solid in my sobriety today. I wouldn't be where I am or who I am without having that experience, and although I wish it hadn't been as dangerous or as long as it had, nobody chooses to become an addict. Nobody chooses to have that experience. Does it erase the 2 years of sobriety that I had before that relapse? No, not at all. I'm incredibly proud of that 2 years, and I'm incredibly proud of this 2 years that I've gotten this time around. Do I still think about relapse? Of course I do. This year has been incredibly challenging, and not just for me, but being sober and being isolated and alone is not easy. I'm holding on though because I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of my apartment. I'm proud of my school. I'm proud of the growth and the character that I've developed, and I'm proud of what I'm learning. That's what's worked for me so far. That's what's keeping me sober, and I'm grateful for that. So anyways, that's it for today, and I will talk to you guys next week. Bye. AA has this chip poke. So for their Christmas party in December, one of them asked if they wanted there's supposed to be incentives, rewards for, I'm leaps and bounds ahead of where I was before my